Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, talking about Rob Dillingham's role as a rookie off the Timberwolves bench. Whose shots is he replacing? Why his efficiency is so important for the Timberwolves bench unit. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Monday, everybody. Happy Labor Day here in the U.S. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. A big thank you here off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. We've got lots to get to today. We're talking all things Rob Dillingham, of course, the Timberwolves rookie guard that's going to be driving that bench unit. Yes, Naz Reid won Sixth Man of the Year last year, but Rob Dillingham's backcourt scoring from the perimeter is going to be massive for the team this year. And I want to dig a bit into that and also look at it from the lens of whose shots are gone that he'll be replacing. How are the Wolves backfilling some of this production, or really, frankly, lack of production, just empty possessions that some of the guys who are leaving the organization or who have left the organization for other teams, what Dillingham will be tasked with replacing. And hopefully it just lifts the overall efficiency of the Timberwolves bench unit and also in turn their offense overall. So we're going to talk about all that here today. Again, a big thank you for making us your first listen. Of course, you can find this show anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also watch on YouTube, as well as the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right. So last season, the Timberwolves, the bench unit was fine. And the idea a year ago, if you go back and go back in time to last August, last September, we were talking about on this show how the Timberwolves decided to go without a traditional backup point guard. The idea was Shake Milton will be the combo guard that's going to kind of drive this bench unit. And from a scoring standpoint, from a catch and shoot standpoint, he'd play with Anthony Edwards in certain lineups. He would be the engine for the unit that would include Naz Reid being the beneficiary. Shake Milton could be the primary ball handler of that unit and push for his own shot, as well as find others and then play off the ball, knock down threes, etc. Troy Brown Jr. was going to be kind of the energy 3-and-D guy in that unit. He was a streaky shooter for the Lakers the year prior. And the idea, again, was, look, he can play off the ball, wreak some havoc, and this thing will work out. What ended up happening is Shake Milton did not play well in the Timberwolves uniform. There's no two ways about it. There's no positive spin we can put on Shake Milton's time in Minnesota. And he was traded along with Troy Brown Jr. at the deadline to get Monte Morris. And Shake he just never found a rhythm. Only about a third of his shot attempts were from outside the arc. And when he did shoot threes, they didn't go in enough. He shot 26.4% last year on 3-point attempts with the Timberwolves. He was, let's see, how many threes did he shoot per game? He shot 1.5 threes per game in 13 minutes per game. And he was 26% on 3-point attempts. But again, only a third of his shots were from three. He was trying to get to his own shot, trying to get into the paint, was shooting a lot of like 10, 12 footers, weird kind of hanging jumpers, trying to go to the glass a lot. Like, it's just stuff that wasn't working. Couldn't quite get all the way to the rim, wasn't drawing fouls. Some of the things he did with the Sixers, and we saw him do it against the Wolves a couple of years ago to the tune of 20+ points off the bench for Philly. That didn't work in Minnesota. It just never quite clicked. And yeah, spacing wasn't always great with the bench unit. Sometimes when Rudy was on the floor with them, that was maybe part of it. But it was more just Shake never found a rhythm. It didn't work out. And then as the bench kind of reshaped itself over the course of the year, we saw Jordan McLaughlin rotation minutes, eventually Monte Morris, to Alexander Walker ended up initiating more offense than I think the Timberwolves anticipated. And then Naz Reid ends up winning Sixth Man of the Year and kind of papered over some of those issues because Naz had such a good year. And also the starting unit was so good and the defense was so good that we never spent all that much time talking about the bench unit struggles other than the 13 minutes a game that Shake was on the floor and everyone was just kind of had their head in their hands wondering what's the plan here. So now fast forward to this offseason, and the Timberwolves kind of sort of went about it the same way. Not the same function, right? They didn't have a mid-level exception to go sign somebody like a Shake Milton, but instead they traded up in the draft to number 8. They draft Rob Dillingham, who, frankly, if he was 2 or 3 inches taller and 20 pounds heavier or whatever, 30 pounds heavier, he would have been a top 3 pick in this draft, no question. And you could still argue he was the premier offensive talent in this draft. There's serious defensive question marks. We'll talk about that. We have talked about it. We'll talk about it more. And obviously size being the primary concern. But this dude can score the basketball. And he's much smaller than Shake Milton, but the thought process here is the same. Let's get a guy who can run the second unit, push for his own shot, make others get, create good shots for others. When the ball swings to him, he's a knockdown 3-point shooter, and we can play him off the ball next to Anthony Edwards with the starting lineup. Or with, a primarily starters unit, but play next to Anthony Edwards, or you put Ant with the second unit, and Dillingham could play off the ball with Ant. It's the same idea as the Shake Milton thing, but he's a better shooter, no question, and he's obviously smaller and a rookie, a one-and-done player who only started a single game in Kentucky last year, came off the bench the rest of the season, didn't start, but was the number 8 pick in the draft this year. But the idea is the same. Tim Conley and Chris Finch think this is a higher usage type guy who can be the straw that stirs the drink, but also knock down open, catch and shoot threes. That's the right fit for what they're looking for from their bench. That's the idea here. So it's replicating that idea, but with a better player. Now, let's look at some of the guys who are gone now. This is what I want to focus on next is Shake Milton's gone, obviously. Now, I know he wasn't on the team post deadline, but we can look at what he was supposed to produce and what he did produce or tried to produce based on just the shots he took early in the season. We could talk about, it usually wasn't Jordan McLaughlin and Monte Morris, but one of those guys from that role. And then also Kyle Anderson. Those are the guys that are gone. Their production is basically supposed to be filled by Rob Dillingham. And yeah, there'll be a 9th guy in the rotation. Given the night, it'll be Joe Ingles. It might be TJ Shannon. We'll talk about that too. But the shots that are leaving weren't efficient shots. They weren't efficient offensive players that were taking those shots. If they're replaced with a player in Dillingham who, if he's as efficient as he was at Kentucky, how dramatically does that change what the Timberwolves offense and specifically the bench unit is able to do? So I want to focus on that next. And we'll get into the weeds a bit on the quality of shots and the production or lack of production offensively for Slow-Mo, from Shake Milton, Jordan McLaughlin, from the guys that are no longer on the roster from last season, and how that's being backfilled this year. So we'll focus on all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. I love going to live events, no matter what kind they are. Obviously, I love sports. I'm also my wife and I love theater. We love comedy shows, go to concerts quite a bit with friends. All of the above you can get at Game Time. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. There's plenty of options. They also in Game Time Picks, within that, they'll curate your options to make it easier to save more on all the things I already mentioned. Yes, sports, but also concerts, comedy, theater, and more. If you're interested in knowing all your fees up front, toggle in the all-in pricing feature. It'll show you your total up front, and there will be no surprise fees at checkout. Again, just toggle on the all-in pricing option. It's really great to view it that way. You can also get a panoramic view from your seat for your event in the app before you buy. And of course, their lowest price guarantee means that Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if you find a better price somewhere else. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. A big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen of the day. Of course, for your second listen, go enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA, available on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, so no longer on the Timberwolves. So a way that I've talked about this on this show and others here in the last few weeks is 7 of the top 8 guys in the Timberwolves rotation from last year are back. 7 of the top 8 rotation guys. And that's a little fresher in our minds because of the playoffs. Most teams only have 8 players that play within a rotation in a regular playoff game. The regular season, it's more like 9, sometimes 10. So if you expand it to 9, it's 7 of 9, because we're talking about obviously Kyle Anderson being the one in the top 8 that was also in the playoff rotation, who's no longer on the team. But you go to that 9th spot, and it's some combination of Jordan McLaughlin or Monte Morris that had that 9th spot. Earlier in the season, it was Shake Milton or Troy Brown Jr. So 7 of the top 9 guys are back. Of course, they're starting 5 plus Naz Reid plus Dike Alexander-Walker. So you're backfilling your 8 and 9 spots, which belonged to Kyle Anderson is the easy one. And then some combination of Shake Milton, Jordan McLaughlin, Monte Morris, Troy Brown Jr. Those guys all at various points of the season held the number 9 spot in the rotation. That was really kind of it, other than some here and there injury games where it was, a couple Luka Garza games and I guess that was really kind of it. TJ Warren for a couple of games after he was signed initially. So, but we'll focus mostly on those guys that are gone. The guys that were regularly in the rotation. So let's start with slow-mo. Kyle Anderson, it's well documented. He struggled offensively last year, and it was coming off the heels of what you could argue is the best offensive season of his career in the 22-23 season. But last year, he just did not shoot the ball well. Overall from the field, Kyle Anderson ended up shooting 46% because he got to his push shot around the elbows and in a little bit, or more frequently as the year went on. But he was only 23% outside the arc and only shot 0.6 threes per game. So, per 36 minutes, that was 1 3 per 36 minutes. And again, 23%. And this was just a year after shooting over 40% on slightly greater volume, but exclusively from the corner. So all that to say, Kyle Anderson was not a good offensive player last year for Minnesota. Offensive rating wise, which I think is not my favorite. I know it's not my favorite mark to look at offensive rating for individual players. Like, for instance, Anthony Edwards didn't have a great individual offensive rating, but I think that's a much better team stat than the individual one. In fact, Kyle Anderson's was almost exactly the same as Ant, slightly higher even. But he did not have a good offensive season. The turnovers were way higher than they should have been. Let's see, what was his turnover rate? It was 15.6% last year. Kyle Anderson's was, which was highest on the team, higher than Karl-Anthony Towns by 1.5. Higher than Shake Milton by 2.1 percentage points. The shooting, not ideal. True shooting percentage, 51.3%, which was dead last of anybody that was in the rotation except for Shake Milton. Okay, so we're going to get back. Shake's going to keep coming up here, right? So actually, we could put it this way. Actually, let's do this. Here's another one. Like I could go all day. We list offensive, if you want to look at offensive box plus minus on Basketball Reference, which again, one number. It's noisy. I get it. It's not truly all encompassing, but it paints a picture. If we look at all these numbers and they all tell us essentially the same thing. Offensive box plus minus. Kyle Anderson was worst on the Timberwolves of anybody in the rotation except for Jaden McDaniels, and then Shake Milton would be the other one. Kyle Anderson was 13th, but that includes guys like Leonard Miller and Luka Garza and stuff like that. But of any of the rotation guys, he was lowest, except for Jaden McDaniels and Shake Milton. So, said another way, 2 of the bottom 3 guys by almost any measure in the Timberwolves rotation last year in terms of offensive metrics were Kyle Anderson and Shake Milton. Let's look at it this way. This is obviously, like, I'll acknowledge this is a very noisy way to look at this. It's relatively crude, okay? But just look at field goals per game. Kyle Anderson shot 5.5 field goal attempts per game. Shake Milton, when he was in the rotation, 4.2 field goal attempts per game. Jordan McLaughlin, a shade under 3. Monte Morris, about 4.5. So, like, Monte Morris and Jordan McLaughlin weren't often in the rotation at the same time. So we'll say they're worth 3 shots a game. Kyle Anderson, 5.5 shots a game. So let's round it down and call it 8 shots a game between Kyle Anderson in the backup point guard role, and Troy Brown's around 3 shots too. So that's about right. Call it 8 shots a game, rounding down. So on average, if you have 8 shots a game that were being shot by some combination of Kyle Anderson, Shake Milton, Monte Morris, Jordan McLaughlin. McLaughlin obviously shot threes at a great clip last year. He was 47%. The usage was relatively low. He came on hot at the end of the season. So he's kind of the outlier here. And Monte Morris was actually fine in a Wolves uniform offensively. He shot 42% in the regular season. He didn't shoot it well in the playoffs, so that's fresher for us. But you're replacing the production of your two worst offensive rotation players last year, Kyle Anderson and Shake Milton, and whatever you were getting out of the back point guard spot. That's 8 shots a game, and you're giving those shots to Rob Dillingham. What did Rob Dillingham do at Kentucky? I know Kentucky's not the NBA, but he was a 44.4% three-point shooter on nearly 8 attempts per game. Sorry, 4.5 attempts. I was looking at 100 possessions. 44% three-point shooter on 4.5 attempts per game. Okay, he only played 23 minutes per game. Again, came off the bench. But the sample size isn't minuscule. We're talking 33 games. And I mentioned this earlier. I mentioned that he was a great three-point shooter. But remember, we've talked about this on past shows. He had 88, Rob Dillingham had 88 catch-and-shoot three-point attempt opportunities last year at Kentucky. He shot 48% on those. Not a huge sample size. We're talking 1 year in college, but 88 attempts is different than like 12 attempts. He wasn't like 7 of 12. On 88 catch-and-shoot three-point attempts, he was 48% from three. Also, off the dribble threes, 38%. He was a good off the dribble shooter from everywhere. So what can Rob Dillingham do? He can create his own shot, off the dribble shoot jumpers. He can play off the ball and shoot catch-and-shoot threes at a nearly 50% clip. He's got a good floater. He didn't get to it a ton, but a good floater. He's a really good pick and roll player. He shot 43% as the ball handler out of pick and rolls on three-pointers. And he averaged 1 point per possession as a pick and roll ball handler, which is good. Really good. What were they expecting Shake Milton to do last year? That. They're expecting him to handle and pick and roll. They're expecting him to get his own shot. They're expecting him to play off the ball. When the ball swung to him, he was supposed to knock down catch and shoot threes. He did not do any of the above. That's what they're counting on Rob Dillingham to do. And frankly, offensively, he's not going to be worse than what they got from Shake Milton and Kyle Anderson last year. 2 of the 3 worst players by any measure offensively for the Wolves in the rotation last season. And you're replacing their 8 shots per game with a dude that was a fantastic offensive player at Kentucky last year. I'll say it again, 44.4% on threes, 4.5 a game. 48% from the floor, 80% at the free throw line. 48% on catch and shoot three-point opportunities. 43% shooting three-pointers as the ball handle out of the pick and roll. 38% off the dribble three-point shooter. The free throw rate was really good last year. 40% of his shot attempts were from outside the arc. The assist to turnover was solid. Rob Dillingham is a fantastic offensive player, and I know that size will be something that we'll have to see how that plays out. We saw it hurt him a little early in Summer League, but he hit his stride as Summer League went on, and I think he adjusted a little bit to the pace, the size, the athleticism of the other men he was playing against. It's a little different in college, even Summer League is. So we'll have to see how the size ultimately plays. But in terms of the pure offensive skill, the skill set is the same, but better and more efficient than what they got out of Shake Milton last year. And that's like add in Kyle Anderson too. And in a minute here, I want to talk about Joe Ingles and Terrence Shannon Jr. and what the Wolves are getting from those guys, because combined, the 3 of them are replacing the production of the Kyle Anderson role and the Shake / Monte Morris / Jordan McLaughlin role. That's how they're backfilling this thing, is with guys who are legit plus offensive players. And again, most of that focus, most of those shots are going to go to Rob Dillingham on a nightly basis. Let's talk about all that here next, and include Joe Ingles and TJ Shannon in the conversation as well here in a moment. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by BetterHelp. The show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's something you'd love to learn? As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you'd like, or was that something that you lost in childhood? I know for me, there's plenty of things that I'd like to try doing, but I don't know. I don't feel like I have time. I don't get to it. And at the same time, like my kids, they're always learning and growing. As adults, we can lose that curiosity, or at least lose the will to act on that curiosity and carve out time to learn new things. Like what's something you'd like to learn? Think about it. It could be gardening. It could be a new language. It could be how to bowl better. It could be learning a musical instrument, etc. Any of the above, or whatever else comes to mind when I ask the question. Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder, because your back to school era can come at any age. We're all, everybody's back to school. The kids are all back to school now. You could go back to school yourself at your age now when it comes to something you're curious about, something you'd like to learn. If you're thinking of starting therapy, it can help you connect in all those areas. Give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, so we've established that the 8-ish shots a game that the Timberwolves lost in free agency / traded away last year in the form of Shake Milton, but also Kyle Anderson, Monte Morris, Jordan McLaughlin, 8 shots a game, we're calling it. It's gone. A lot of those are going to be shot by Rob Dillingham. We've established his credentials as a scorer and the role he's going to fill. But the other guys that are going to be at the end of the rotation this year for the Wolves, I think Joe Ingles is probably pretty safely can be slotted in as the 9th guy. I know he didn't play heavy minutes. I think he played like 15 minutes a game for Orlando last year. Those numbers went down as the year went on. He barely played for Australia in the Olympics, wasn't even really in their rotation. He's getting old. He's long in the tooth. But the dude can still shoot threes. And when he gets his hands on the ball and he gets a shot up at the rim, like, it's efficient. He did have turnover issues last year. But again, so did Kyle Anderson. Kyle Anderson turned the ball over more than anyone else on the Wolves last season. Joe Ingles was in terms of rate, not actual volume, but rate. Joe Ingles, same thing for Orlando. It was actually his worst turnover rate of his career last year for Orlando at age 36, which is a bit weird. But it was his highest assist rate in 4 years. Like his third highest assist rate in his career last year for Joe Ingles. So he was playing a bit more of an offensive initiation distributor role last year for Orlando. But again, like 71% of his shot attempts were threes. 2/3 of his shot attempts for his career have been 3-pointers. And he was 43.5% last year, 41% the year prior in Milwaukee. Go before the ACL injury, and he was 39%, between 39 and 44% for 5 consecutive years. He then tore his ACL in a half season. He was 35%. That's the only year of his career besides his rookie season that he was below 39% from three. The dude's going to knock down open threes when he gets the chance. And assuming the turnover rate isn't astronomical like it was in a Magic uniform last year, Joe Ingles is going to be able to kind of keep that bench unit moving along. Say Rob Dillingham's having a rough game. Say he's out of the rotation for a brief period of time, or he's in foul trouble, or whatever. In fact, Tim Conley did an interview on KFAN the other day, and there was what did he say? I'm going to see if I can find his quote real quick. I have it here somewhere. He made a comment. I'm paraphrasing, but he made a comment. I just took down some notes on this about his about how if Rob Dillingham misses a defensive assignment, it matters, and then he'll have to learn that from the bench. In other words, really kind of alluding to the idea of if he's not playing good defense, whether it's he's getting physically dominated. I mean, he doesn't say that. I guess he more specifically is stating if he misses an assignment, like if he misses a switch, he doesn't fight through a screen, etc. Some of the stuff we saw D'Lo do frequently a couple of years ago and prior, he's going to be on the bench, which means Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Joe Ingles are going to run that bench unit. So there's going to be opportunities for other guys, and hopefully Dillingham, we're not going to talk too much about the defense today, but hopefully Dillingham can hold his own defensively for Minnesota. But Joe Ingles is going to have opportunities to run the offense, with the bench unit as well. And then TJ Shannon, we talked a little bit about him, or I mentioned him as somebody else that's going to take some of those shots off the bench. Last year for Illinois, he was more of a volume 3-point shooter than he was a sharpshooter. He's 36.2% from three. The year prior, he's only 32%. His last year at Texas Tech before transferring, he was 38%. So for his college career, 35%. He's more of a distance and volume guy than he is like a flamethrower from outside the arc. And that's okay. He's not going to turn the ball over a ton because I don't think he's going to have it in his hands and be attacking beyond transition opportunities. So if TJ Shannon's shooting the ball, it's because it's an open three or he's attacking in transition. And by definition, open threes and transition plays are really the two most efficient opportunities that there are. So TJ Shannon is going to have every opportunity to be efficient off the bench. Combine that with Rob Dillingham's catch and shoot opportunities and everything he'll be doing. And then you layer in Joe Ingles and his opportunities. The three of those guys together are going to be far more efficient than what Kyle Anderson, Shake Milton, Jordan McLaughlin, Monte Morrison, what those guys provided, or at least attempted to provide last year. It's really like the formula I'm giving you is admittedly oversimplified, but it's real. Those 8 shots out from inefficient offensive players are being replaced by 8-ish shots in from players, albeit 2 of them are rookies and 1 of them is 36. So one of them may be too old to make a positive impact at some point this year, and 2 of them may be too young or too raw. I mean, Terrence Shannon's like 25 or 20. What is he? 24. Let's see. It doesn't matter. He's going to be, I think he's 24, or he'll be 24 this year. So Dillingham's obviously very young. TJ Shannon's a rookie. So 2 rookies and a guy who's going to be 37 are replacing that production, but they're not going to be less efficient than Kyle Anderson offensively or than what Shake Milton did in a Timberwolves uniform in the first half of last season. So while it's not quite that clean, if you take the input and the output, or you take what the input's going to be, the output should be more efficient this year. And even if it's only 8 shots a game, or it's only, the bench unit, and it's, 10, 12 minutes or whatever a game that those guys are really going to be on the floor together, that adds up over the course of a game, over the course of a season. And as the Timberwolves are fighting for playoff positioning down the stretch in the regular season next year. So I think that's a good way to look at how Tim Conley reshaped the bench on the fly. He still has the NBA 6th man of the year. And this team is still going to be one of the top 3 or 4 teams in the Western Conference next year without making any moves in free agency besides a partially guaranteed deal to PJ Dozier and a minimum deal for Joe Ingles. That's it. Otherwise, it's draft moves and letting guys walk. The way that this thing shook out, the input and output, to me, that's one way to look at this. And I think it's a pretty interesting way to look at how Tim Conley kind of retooled this bench unit. All right. That's all we have for you today here on the show. We'll be back, of course, on Wednesday and Friday this week. We're 3 shows during the week for the next couple of weeks. We'll be back to 5 shows a week before the end of the month. So believe it or not, like we're like a month away from the first preseason game. So lots upcoming here on the show the coming days and weeks. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow at X at Locked On T Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. A big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Now go check out the Locked On NBA podcast, where the season never ends, providing national expertise with a local perspective. You can find the link to Locked On NBA in the description of this show, so you don't need to go searching for it. Of course, we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.